Hi everyone, welcome to our Fourth Universalist service video. My name is Reverend Skylar Vogel. I serve as one of the ministers here. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm so glad you're joining us for these videos. What follows are selections from our service on April 10th. We are talking about the state of American religion in the past, now how the pandemic has affected it, and what that means for us at Fourth Universalist as we continue our path towards growth and living our full selves here in New York City. In this video, you'll hear a reading, you'll hear my reflection, and then you'll hear a discussion between myself and our Director of Religious Education, Ember Kelly. We hope you enjoy all three of these pieces of video, and we hope that you'll check out past videos, past podcasts, and we post them every week on our website, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and your favorite podcast streaming sites. If you like what you see, we hope you'll give us a positive review, to like and comment and share and subscribe to help spread the Fourth Universalist message a little further. Our community is located on the land of the Muncie Lenape people. This acknowledgement is part of our continued effort to dismantle ongoing legacies of oppression. We invite you to join us in this work as we embrace the 8th UU principle. Thank you again for watching. We begin with our reading.
Our reading today is by American poet, writer, and thinker Parker Palmer. It is a poem entitled Harrowing. The plow has savaged the sweet field, misshapen clods of earth kicked up, rocks and twisted roots exposed to view last year's growth demolished by the blade. I have plowed my life this way, turned over a whole history, looking for the roots of what went wrong, until my face is ravaged, furrowed, scared. Enough. The job is done. Whatever's been uprooted, let it be seedbed for the growing that's to come. I have plowed to unearth last year's reasons. The farmer plows to plant for a greening season.
My first two congregations were places of scarcity and struggle. I was a religious educator then, like Ember, telling stories to kids and running Sunday schools. The first congregation was only 10 years old when I arrived, and it had grand ambitions. It was founded by our denomination on the theory that if you fund a brand new church and fund it as if it was a big church, it would become big. UU mega churches, here we were coming. Or so we hoped. That congregation had a lot of money, and for a time they were the golden child of Unitarian Universalism. The only problem was the theory was wrong. Funding a congregation as if it were big does not make them grow. They stayed small. During my year there, that money ran out. It didn't help that the whole country was going through the recession in 2008, or that a hurricane had recently torn through town, forcing half of the city's businesses to permanently close. So the congregation was forced to choose between hoping for a miracle and drastically cutting everything in their budget. They chose to cut everything. Their minister down to half-time, their programs and me. I landed my next church in the suburbs of Chicago, also a religious educator. Before I had arrived, unbeknownst to me, they had lost a huge contract from a tenant and had to make drastic cuts to their budget, in particular mine. I find myself managing our children's religious education program with $20,000 less than my predecessor, and was supervising a staff team that was working 30 hours a week less per week, all with the exact same expectations as the year before. Both of these congregations, in addition to these budget challenges, had severe conflict between their lay leadership and their clergy. It was not me. And predictably, membership struggled, attendance struggled, volunteering plummeted, and morale across the board was awful. No one wanted to come to services. If you did come, you would hear complaining and arguing. It was bad. I have learned since those first two congregations how common these stories actually are. Religion in America is struggling. Religious communities are struggling. Congregations are closing at a rate of almost 4,000 per year. Researchers believe that in the next 10 years, it may be double or even triple that per year. We know that for the first time in American history, more than half of Americans are unaffiliated with a religious community. Now, only 47% of people are part of religion. That's down from 70% in 1999, 47 to 70. Beyond membership, those who identify with zero religious tradition has risen astronomically. In 2007, 16% of people said, "I have no religion," 16%. Today, it's almost 30. And of course, the pandemic has only made these trends more extreme. Attendance across America is down 6%, and this decrease is much greater for younger people and older people. Another study showed that in Christian congregations, a third of their membership has gone and not come back. Finally, and often overlooked, many religious buildings around the country are beginning to fail. So many were built at the exact same time, and after years of deferred maintenance, they are collectively reaching a breaking point, a place of no return, with congregations that do not have resources to fix them. These trends are powerful and they are sobering. They speak to a cultural force that is beyond the power of any faith tradition, congregation, place, or clergy. We are all swimming against a powerful current of decline. Just this week in our neighborhood, news broke that one of our neighboring churches, a good friend of ours, faces a $25 million roof repair, or their building is going to collapse. We, a few years ago, faced a $1.6 million roof repair, and we barely did it. How do you do 25 million? Another church not too far from here has a steeple that they can neither afford to fix or take down. What do you do if it's in danger of collapsing? How do you survive that? In Midtown, our sister Unitarian Universalist congregation has sold their building and moved to only afternoon services after 100 years of perhaps being the flagship congregation for a good part of those years. Now they meet in the afternoons sharing space with a Christian church. Our sister congregation in Queens is likely going to close. This is happening across the country. It's happening right here in our neighborhood, in our city. In many ways, our congregation, the Fourth Universalist Society, has been very fortunate. We have been in a time of plenty. We've managed to fight this strong current of decline, even though we swim against it like everybody else. Our membership has increased, doubled. Our budget has increased. New groups have been born and flourished. Our justice media ministry was covered by national media, and we did raise the money to save our roof and our building, lest we have to sell it and move. But it is not reasonable for us to assume we can evade the challenging tides around us forever. We are not invincible or immune from these currents. The pandemic for us has been tough. It has wiped out our event rental income, while inflation has increased staffing costs, which we offer for cost of living adjustments. The real estate market has saddled us with a reduced lease with our major tenant, and our building, despite the new roof, is still old. You don't have to look too carefully to see other things that we need to fix. And perhaps most powerfully for us in the moment, as a congregation with many non-New Yorkers, people from other places in this country, other places around the world, we have been hit during the pandemic by folks who just have moved away, left New York, good leaders, strong members, who've joined us now online, but are hard to offer their strong leadership in person. All the while being online, struggling to find ways of increasing leadership, nurturing new folks, because online is simply not the same as in person. All is not bad, though. There are still ways that we are fighting this current strongly. Attendance is equal or perhaps even higher to what it was before the pandemic. We include the folks online, of which there, I think right now, are 60 or so screens. We're working on a balanced budget for next year without needing to cut staff into the heart of our programming. And we have a plan to increase rentals and make our building more desirable. You see the cool lights that have already started here. But perhaps the biggest challenge that we face as a congregation and that religion faces across the country because of the pandemic, it's something that lies beyond any of our control. It's a national challenge. It's that everybody that I talk to is so tired about doing everything after 2 years of all of this. Since coming back from the pandemic, from my family leave 2 weeks ago, I've heard just about in every conversation how tired folks are, how burnt out around the edges we are, how we're pulled in a million different directions, juggling so many different commitments, not just in this community, but everywhere in our lives. In life, it could be at work, with family and friends. Maybe it's about health. Maybe we're struggling with a diagnosis or hospital visits that during a time of a pandemic just increase that level of anxiety and stress. Maybe you're sick of 2 years of struggling with your kids having to wear masks in school or be sent home or have school canceled if there's an outbreak, and find childcare, which is expensive. Maybe you're a single person who's exasperated by dating in New York, which I hear is exasperating already, and you're having to juggle concerns about partners being safe. Maybe you're working in a place that doesn't respect the safety, your safety, is asking you to come back sooner than you'd like. Or this is the weight of the world. You see a war in Ukraine, and it's depressing. You see climate change, and it's depressing. You see the state of democracy, in this country and around the world, and it's depressing too, and that is a burden on your soul. We know that life is anxious and tiring, even in normal times. And prolonged trauma attached to the pandemic has left so many of us running on fumes. Now, there is a farming concept that I've always loved, that of a fallow field. It describes an agricultural technique that allows a plot of land to rest and replenish itself. Nothing is planted there by the farmer. Nothing is cultivated. There are no grand plans for that field, no expectations. A fallow field just sits. To an ignorant eye, it looks wasted and unproductive, doing nothing at all. But the farmer knows that from its stillness comes regeneration. Nutrients are being restored. The soil is renewing. And after a time, crops can be planted again and new life can grow. We know that now is not a time of plenty, but it is also not a time for despair. Our story cannot be, as individuals, as a country, as communities, always that of growth and progress. The field can't always be so full in its harvest. It is okay for this to be a fallow chapter in our story. We must not see it as a defeat or a disappointment or as our fault. We know the current runs strong against us, no matter what stream we're swimming in. And sometimes to survive is simply a victory. So I want to give you permission to rest. I want you to come into this space and not feel the obligation to fix or save anything. I want you to feel okay to not be 100%. To feel okay to be muddling through your life, your job, your relationships, this congregation. I want you to feel it's okay to put down the burden of making everything work exactly like it used to, as good or as perfect as whatever we remember it being. I want you to feel like you can make this place, this hour every week, a refuge, a sanctuary, an oasis from all of those expectations that feel so heavy on us. What I want for every one of you is just that you're happy and well and whole. You can, of course, volunteer here as much as you like. We hope it will center you and inspire you and give you a chance to make deeper connections. But know that at least here there is no existential threat that requires you sacrifice your wholeness for our collective survival. We'd rather have you here well than working. That way, sometime in the future, when the world, we pray, has settled down and you have been replenished and the fear of burning out has receded and you have sunken deeply into that peaceful, calming soil of what grounds you, then the next chapter can begin. Then together we can nurture those seeds that have been quietly growing. Shoots of energy will emerge again, and there will be a bountiful harvest we can all enjoy. It will be beautiful then, I know. But it will be no more beautiful than the empty, fallow fields that we live in now, surviving against all odds, becoming well again. Because the fallow fields are sacred too. While our world may continue to feel like it spirals out of control, while American religion may continue to decline, I am confident we can emerge from this fallow time as vibrant as we've ever been. We have all made it this far, not easily, not unbruised, but we've made it. We have bucked the trends and currents before, and we'll keep doing it again and again. I know it. If we do, we just need to rest in that fallow fields of this chapter. May it be so, and amen.
Reverend Schuyler, it's so good to get the chance to sit down once again. Thank you for I want to say affirming. I think in some senses, I think a lot of people have been struggling with burnout recently, and I think that it was really important to have that, said from the pulpit that it's okay to be feeling those feelings. So thanks for really affirming message today.
Well, you're welcome, and I hope that it resonated with everyone, and whether you are a member of this congregation or not, or whether or not you are a regular participant or not, I hope that it felt important and felt like it spoke to you in some way, because whether we're struggling in this congregation or otherwise, we all experience exhaustion right now. We're all being overwhelmed, and it's really important for us to not feel like we kind of carry the world on our shoulders like Atlas, because not only is this just not true, the world will not rise or fall based on any one of us, but ultimately it's short-sighted. It hurts us more than it hurts anything else.
I was tempted to say, well, it will rise or fall without me, but that's
We'll see, Amber. You're leaving us for a couple weeks not permanently, fortunately, but we will see how we all do without your exemplary leadership.
That's why I'm preparing a whole list of here's what to do on Sunday while I'm gone. I'm prepared. But no, I think that, as you point out, this isn't just us feeling tired right now. This is, most of society, in all honesty. I think it's the reason why we've seen people kind of, I hesitate to use the word give up, but I'm trying to think of a better word, where people are just kind of exhausted by COVID. People are just kind of worn down, and that has impacted the church too. There's already some bigger trends going, which we'll kind of talk about in a little bit, but this exhaustion is a whole society-wide feeling, I think, right now. But this isn't something that society is, it's not the first time this has happened. And it's not the first time this has happened for the church too. I think that, you point out a little bit that there's been these times in Fourth U's history that we have good times and bad times, and that happens. But I think this also really shows up in wider church history too, the times of revival and the times where everyone's preaching about how worldly and sinful everyone is now because they're not going to church. So these are patterns that aren't just right now. We're not the first people. We can look at the resources from thousands of years of people dealing with the same problems.
That's right. On a national level, the American fascination with the 1950s extends beyond American religion, but it is especially tied to our image of what religion looks like in America for us today. We think about churches that have been declining since the 50s. Everyone went to church in the 50s or went to some religious community in the 50s. And it's true that the 50s were a very popular time to go to be part of a religious community, but it was actually quite an anomaly. You look back throughout American history, and people have not been particularly pious about going to the church on Sundays, being part of the religious communities. And so the popular imagination of America as a church-going place, there's truth to that at times, and there have been moments of revival, like you said, Ember. But the way that we perceive it today is based on this peak moment in the 50s that was not representative of sort of the general trend of American religious attendance or participation. And in some ways, what we're seeing now, which is a pretty steep decline and drop in this, the levels now are much more akin to what we've seen across American history. And there's lots of reasons for that, and I'm not a church historian, but I do think it can inspire us to some level of grace and even forgiveness for ourselves as people who care about religious communities, that it's not about us, right? And there are things that we can do to be more accessible, to speak to the moment in time that we're in, to be relevant. But there are larger cultural forces at work, as we're seeing, right? And I talk about that in my sermon, that we're all in that current of congregational decline. And congregations is just sort of the institution that represents organized religion, right? Because that's sort of the focal point. But you see that trend across other institutions that are religious, other forms of metrics around how you define what religious is. So.
Well, one of the ones that, as we were preparing for this conversation, that we were talking about is just generational differences. Because I mean, as you point out, the 50s were kind of the strange time, but boomers had this very high religiosity, and now you see, I saw, I believe it was a TikTok, I saw something that was saying that for Gen Z and for millennials, that the agnostic or nuns or like vaguely spiritual but not tied to anything, that's nearing like 40, almost 50%, versus like previous generations where that was maybe like 10, 20. So I mean, there's wider cultural changes happening for folks.
Absolutely right. The baby boomer generation was raised mostly in the 50s, right? 50s and early 60s, and they grew up in that peak moment in American religious history. They were brought to church. We know that those who are not raised going to church or any religious community are far less likely to, as adults, participate. It's just not, it appears to just not be into the operating schema of people who are not raised. They don't think about doing it. They don't want to do it. It's not what they consider a good use of their time. And so, these things snowball, right? So the more you have people who don't do it and the more generations pass, religious communities really have to wrestle with, so who are they serving? And it's a bit different for Unitarian Universalists, and I know we're talking about that as well later, but we are still not immune from these trends.
I think that's curious because, especially like how converts, coming from the evangelical world, the people who like, I was lost in complete sin and I was, dealing drugs and doing all these horrible things and I became a Christian, they're held up as like, wow, look, like all of these people that we're reaching, but that really is a small percentage compared to many of the denominations, many of the congregations that grow simply by having a new generation of kids. That is often the case for a lot of religious history, that it's mainly there. And I found that particularly fascinating that you mentioned that, because one of the really interesting things for me as someone who grew up just so incredibly religious is talking to people who don't have that context at all and realizing just how strange it was, like especially having grown up in a very specific borderline cultish right-wing evangelicalism, like to talk to people who just never went to church, and it's like, wait, what? Like these weren't universal experiences. It's different, and there isn't that interest. There's not like, wow, I just can't. And if there ever is that interest, like in the case of, I even think of my own parents who had left the church because they didn't like what they had seen from their parents, but then when I was born said, hey, we need to go to church again, we have a kid. So a lot of times that's the only thing that maybe will change someone older's mind, will be like, oh, we have a kid, so like we should give them a good like religious upbringing. It's really fascinating the things that cause this formation, the faith formation.
Yeah, I think that's something that is one of the ways that people do come back to religious life, is that they have children and they think about, oh, I want to give them a similar experience to what I had. Maybe they didn't need, as parents, need it before they had children, but they want that. There's something that spoke to them, resonated with them, felt like it shaped them as human beings that they want for their kids. Although even that is changing. I mean, one of the things when I was a religious educator, we talked a lot about is, particularly from a certain generation, like that expectation was much more true with our parents' generation, both of us, right? My parents are boomers, than with our generation. Even though we both go to church obviously a lot. We both have kids who are in this program, but I think we're seeing that less and less so. And so, what inspires people to come be part of a religious community, I think, is an open question. Particularly if you're not already grounded in one. And we're seeing that, right? That like in most of growth, we think about like Mormons, the Church of Latter-day Saints, and they're missionaries, right? But most of their growth doesn't come from missionaries. They don't. It's not. I read somewhere that you're lucky if you get 1 or 2 converts from your 2 years of doing that. Most of it comes from population growth, right? Of families having children and having them be raised Mormon. And UUs, Unitarian Universalists, our children don't tend to stick around in Unitarian Universalism. They do, I think, often and most always are raised and then keep the values that are intrinsic to Unitarian Universalism: progressive views, commitment to social justice, open-mindedness, non-doctrinal spirituality. But whether they choose to grow up and then join a UU congregation, it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare. And so we live off converts generally as a denomination, as a congregational system. And so the question for us is, what happens when all the rest of the congregation, other religious communities are all losing their people, right? And so it's the spigot of people leaving other congregations and other religious communities starts to dribble a bit more than flow, right? And so we start getting less people, because we have seen, again, is that we don't see people who aren't raised anything coming to UU congregations either. They're almost always from communities, Catholic, evangelical, Protestant, Jewish synagogues. Very rarely, it's not unheard of, but very rarely do folks just come from totally church background, particularly by themselves. Maybe they'll have a partner who was something and they say, we want to go someplace. So Unitarian Universalism is the logical step. But we'll see, we're seeing how congregations are closing in UU spaces, right? We're seeing how even in the New York City area, a lot of our congregations that were once able to afford full-time ministers are cutting to half-time. We're seeing Queens close, like I talk about. We're seeing community church. We have to move to afternoon services. So there is a real, this is something that starts happening, right, when it's not in the ethical, not ethical, but in the cultural milieu that we're in anymore.
Right. When I think that, so not to go back to the 50s again, but so much of I even think of our own church building, which was not the 50s, but like 1890s, which was a very big time for our community, like with a minister who was bringing in thousands of people just to hear him preach, and then they would leave right as soon as the sermon was over.
And for New York congregations too, not just us. All these old buildings were built at times of great wealth and great religious participation, right? That's why all these buildings are from the same era, because people had the money and were interested in going to church.
Right, and so now it's a cultural adjustment. We have to adjust to the moment. When I think, one of the things that we've talked about is the pandemic has shifted things perhaps even more, and I think about it as you named, like that even families like that are having kids, they're maybe not quite coming to do church quite the way they used to. And I think that we've seen many extracurricular activities suddenly encroaching more on Sundays. Like that was like unheard of when I was growing up. Like you didn't do Sunday activities. Like that was against the rules. So,
no soccer practice, no, you just weren't scheduled on Sunday morning. It was
right. So now those sorts of things. So now, in a sense, parents are having to decide, like, do I want them to have this team activity or do I want them to have religion? What they have to make calculations. And in a lot of senses, especially because of the pandemic, I think I've talked about this with ample amounts of people, is that not just UUs, but religion as a whole, because of the pandemic and because of moving online for a while and a variety of things like that, it's very, as well as like the whole megachurch movement, it's very much moved to seeing religion as somewhat of like a service that's being offered to people. That we're basically like somewhat of a customer service industry, that we offer you, here is religion. We'll give you one religion for your time. But I think that there is still an undercurrent, and especially I see it in the UU world, of trying to push for church as a community and seeing that as an alternative to this model. Like, I think they can coexist, but but how do we make sure to remember that I think that part of what draws people in is if it's an inspiring community, not just like, yes, interesting services will bring people in too, like interesting opportunities and things to do, but if there's not that feeling of community, I think that that's really what brings people in the door.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting question. We know that the congregations that are growing right now are almost always large congregations, mega churches, congregations that are able to provide services, whether it's, I mean, not worship services, but perhaps follow that more model of you can come in, you get a well done, professionally produced worship experience. There are tons of programs and educational opportunities that you can kind of enroll in, like a little mini university. Um, there you can kind of plug yourself into this system, right? Rather than what most Unitarian Universalist congregations are, and frankly most congregations in America are, which are much more, they're much more community-led, right? They're much more lay-led. People volunteer for things, that's how things happen. But people aren't, like you're saying, they don't necessarily want to do that anymore. And we're seeing that. I think New York is sort of often a bellwether of the larger nation. We certainly see that at Fourth U, where often folks, they want to come in and have their children have a religious education experience. They may not want to volunteer to teach 4 Sundays a month. When I was a religious educator, we really didn't have problems finding people teaching. It was just kind of what people did. Of course, I have kids, I'm going to teach, right? We actually mandated it, that one parent had to do it in order to have their kids be part of it, and we never got any complaints. In fact, we had people fighting over which classes to teach. It's just unheard of here. And so I think, how do we navigate that tension between wanting to offer really high quality services, but not wanting to fall into the transactional nature where we're just sort of a service provider, right? Like we provide good services, that we provide good programs, all of which I think at Fourth Universalist we do. But the trick is that we're not big enough. We're not a corporate-sized congregation, right? And so we're always going to have to need support from the lay membership, the laity, to help things run in a certain way. And so that is a pinch that our community will feel, and is feeling to some degree right now because of the pandemic. That larger congregations, you just pay everyone to do everything, right? Don't have to worry about.
We are definitely not, Joel Osteen's 40,000 member church. We do not have that level of budget. But that being said, there are many great volunteer opportunities. You're not required to volunteer, but we do have lots of ways that you can find a plug in, whether it's with our justice teams, whether it is with our religious education, which we have lead teachers. So if you're nervous about actually having to teach kids, you don't have to be the one who is leading the lesson. You're there to offer support. Or we have our amazing greeting team. We have our hospitality team that makes sure that we have coffee hour. There's many places that you can get plugged in to help really keep that feel of community here at Fourth Universalist.
Right, and I mean, obviously, volunteer opportunities are helpful for the congregation as a whole, right? And it's not just they're helpful for me or for Ember. We appreciate it, but we also hope, and I think Ember, you work really hard on this, as do all of our staff who work with volunteers, that we want these experiences of volunteering to also be nurturing for your own soul and for your own well-being, to build connections so we're not so isolated in our lives. And we all know how isolating New York can be, and how overwhelming it can be, and that these opportunities that we offer for volunteering, you're not just a cog in a wheel, right? You're not just doing stuff because we need you to do it. You're doing it, we hope, because it fulfills some spiritual need in yourself that we try to make logistically very simple and easy to do. Ember provides lessons. The lead teachers are the go-to person. The greeters, you just got to say hi to people and be friendly on Sunday morning. I would love to be a greeter. If I wasn't a minister, I would be the greeter at my congregation, because you just got to say hi to people and say welcome and be proud of your space and help them feel like it's their home, which is a nice thing to do. So we try to make these easy on-ramps, but people are so tired, and that's part of what the sermon's about this week too, right? Is that just how tired people are and how there's so many obligations that we have, and in some ways we feel beaten down, not just by our own lives, but by the world. The war in Ukraine is depressing. The climate change is depressing. State of democracy in America is depressing. Um, it's hard not to feel like the world is depressing. And so how do we turn that from feeling like we can't do anything from that, but actually find ways to give ourselves energy? And so we work really hard at Fourth U, I think. Ember, you can disagree with me, but to leave people, when you leave our services and leave on Sunday, that people feel better about their lives and feel better about the world than more down, and that it's an energy boost rather than an energy suck. We don't want to be energy vampires here.
Well, I think, I would agree. And I think that, you mentioned the spiritually fulfilling. I think with like the option to like help out with the kids, that like I think that's building cross-generational relationships. And I think people love, last week with the First Time for All Ages on the Stairs, these kids are brilliant and amazing and funny and just bring a lot of joy. I think that that's one of the things that really leaves me energized on a Sunday, is getting to interact with these kids and get to know them. And so I think that that's a beautiful thing, finding that place that can be spiritually fulfilling. And I believe that we are having those opportunities for folks here at Fourth Universalist. So if you need them, find them.
That's right. And if you just need a place to rest and be in a beautiful space and listen to some good music and hopefully some interesting words, it's also a good place. And so we try to walk this line between, one, be a place of sanctuary and rest, and also a place of connection and giving back. And we're not always perfect at it, of course, because it's impossible to be perfect, and we're just people trying our best. But we also want to empower you to, as people listening and watching, to make those judgments, right? What you need best for yourselves in this moment of great stress and great burden, and how you can take care of yourself and how we can be helpful and be part of that self-care that you need to do, as we all do.
Self-care is very important. I kind of wish that we had the copyright ability to play "Walk the Line" now as an outro, but alas, I don't think that one's in the budget. I'll write a letter, to the cash estate to see.
Yeah.
But I think that that's right. And so thank you so much for sitting down and for talking and for sharing this message with us today.
Thanks, Ember. Thank you all for listening, watching, and take care of yourselves out there.